Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of November of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. So today is the 26th of November, which means that we have just one day left before a deadline. I would like to remind you that almost a week ago, the President of the United States of America issued an ultimatum to Zelensky. He asked him whether Zelensky is ready to start the negotiation process with the Russian Federation or not. And Zelensky must give a reply tomorrow. Tomorrow he must give an answer. Yes, I am ready to listen and I am ready to start talks with the Russian Federation, or I reject your plan, I will make changes to your plan in my favor, or I will continue the war. So this is the situation. And you know, right before this deadline, the Russians made a very interesting and a very important statement. There can be no talk of any concessions or any surrender of Russia's key approaches in the context of the strategic military strategy, said the Deputy Foreign Minister on Trump's peace plan. Moscow is not prepared to publicly discuss the plan's details, and importantly, it cannot give in to the provocations surrounding this document at this time, Ryabkov added. So the Russians rejected not just any changes that were made by Zelensky and his friends to the 28-point plan that was provided by the President of the United States of America. Furthermore, it seems that the Russians rejected the plan itself. Once again, according to the Russian official position, they still hasn't seen anything. They still hasn't seen this 28-point plan. So that is why maybe this is the reason why the Russians are talking like this. And obviously, the changes that were made by Zelensky would be rejected as well. I would like to remind you that Zelensky, according to different media, accepted the plan of the United States of America, but with some exceptions. Zelensky stated that he wants to see a stronger Ukraine after the special military operation, and I want to see 800,000 army in Ukraine. Furthermore, Zelensky stated that Russia is not the side who can make this decision whether the Ukraine is ready or can join the NATO or not. Ukraine will join the NATO if NATO countries vote for this. And another important thing, that Ukraine will never confirm and will never allow and will never give the Russian Federation any territories of Ukraine. So we are at the deadline. We are at the dead end, most likely. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, because from one side, Zelensky can do whatever he likes and he can just play the role. Because two more important updates we received today from the Western media. And the first one is that Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, will meet with Putin in Moscow on November 28th. So tomorrow Zelensky must give an answer, and right after, the Prime Minister of Hungary will go to Moscow with the purpose to discuss this situation and this issue with the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Most likely he is going to bring a message, a secret message, probably from the President of the United States of America. Another important thing is that Witkoff and Kushner will meet with Putin in Moscow next week. So tomorrow, the answer of the President of Ukraine. The day after tomorrow, Viktor Orban travels to the United States of America, and the next week, Witkoff and Kushner will meet with Putin as well. Most likely they will talk about Ukraine, about the peaceful settlement, and most likely about the future and what is going to be next. So let's wait and see how the things are going to develop, but obviously the most interesting and the most important things are just ahead of us. Now let's return back to Ukraine and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As we discussed during the previous video, the situation is critical in this area. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the area of Stepnogorsk, and Russians continue their mechanized assaults on the direction of the settlement of Orykhov. These two attacks, these two directions serves with one purpose: to pin down the Ukrainian forces and and to force Ukrainians to keep their reserves and their reinforcements always in this area. So they're trying not to allow the Ukrainians to use these units, these forces, with the purpose to stabilize the situation along R85 road and the river of Gaichul. So this is the defense layer. So it's not just a defense layer, this is something like the Zaporizhzhia wall. And when talking about the Zaporizhzhia wall, it's not just the wall for the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. So this wall is the wall and defense layer and the protection for the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, probably the key city in the southern part of Ukraine. And according to information we have, Ukrainians are planning to use all means they have for the purpose to not allow the Russians to break through this area. As we discussed in the previous video, if Russians somehow are able to cross this river and to establish control over this dense network of the fortifications and to capture all these settlements along the river of Gaichul and the road R85, the Russians will basically destroy the entire defense of Ukraine in the area of the city of Zaporizhzhia, and then the Russians most likely will face no resistance in moving further in the western direction. And there are lots of interesting things about this offensive that we will discuss in details. First of all is the distance. So the distance between the city of Zaporizhzhia and the Zaporizhzhia defense, this Zaporizhzhia wall, is around 63 kilometers. But we need to understand two things. The first one is that the Russians, if they want to capture the city of Zaporizhzhia, they don't need to cross this entire distance, because somewhere in the middle of this area to the north of the city of Orekhov, somewhere here, let's calculate the distance, somewhere here between the city of Zaporizhzhia and the current Russian position, so somewhere in 30 kilometers from the city of Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainian authorities would be forced to announce the total and complete evacuation of the eastern part of the city. So imagine yourself, the Russians need to cross just another 30 kilometers or so, and Ukrainians would be forced to announce a total evacuation of the city of Zaporizhzhia. Imagine yourself this media loss and this media victory for the Russians. And then if Russians can move further in the western direction and to cross another 15 kilometers and to get probably this line, and from this configuration the Ukrainians would be forced to start the evacuation of their personnel, of their soldiers, vehicles and so on, because from these positions Russians will be able to establish complete FPV drone control over the river of Dnipro with the use of FPV drones on the let's say fiber optic technology. And from these positions and from this configuration, Ukraine will lose any possibilities to supply and support their contingent from the western bank of the river of Dnipro to the eastern bank of the river of Dnipro. As of now, the population of the city of Zaporizhzhia, let's call it not like this, at the beginning of the special military operation, the population of the city of Zaporizhzhia was 700,000 people. And when talking about the entire agglomeration, we are talking about more than 1 million population. So obviously Ukraine will not be able to supply the city with drones, because it's impossible to supply 700,000 people on the territory of the city just with drones. We're talking about population and army. So that is why from this very moment the Ukrainians will be forced to give this order to fall back from the city. Otherwise their big army would be encircled by the Russians, and basically this big army would be exhausted without supply and support, and at the end would be forced to surrender to the Russians. So the question is, where are the Russians in this configuration, and how long it will take the time for Russians to cross these territories? As of now, the Russians are storming the city of Gulay-Pole. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of changes, and the most important, we received videos. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 23rd of November of 2025, when the Russians, it seems, launched their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Gulay-Pole. By the end of the 21st of November, the Russians secured the settlement by the name of Zaporizhzhia. By the end of the 25th of November, the Russians managed to capture fields to the east of the city of Guliai-Polye, and the most important, according to different mappers, the Russians answered the city of Guliai-Polye itself and captured these farms. And the most important is that by the end of the 26th of November, several very reliable pro-Russian resources stated that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to capture completely the southeastern part of the city of Guliai-Polye, which is located on the Ukrainian side of the river Volga-Chul. I didn't expect this. I expected that first the Russians would secure the territory of Guliai-Polye on the Russian side, and then they will start thinking how to cross the river and how to begin advancing on the Ukrainian side. But now we see that this issue was resolved even before the battle for the northeastern and the eastern part of the Guliai city of Guliai-Polye, which is located on the Russian side, which means that everything will develop much faster than I expected. And currently, I believe that nobody has doubts that the battle for the city of Guliai-Polye, if nothing special happens, will be finished during 2025, by the end of the 2025, by the end of the December of 2025. The Russians, as you can see, intensify their bombardments and attacks through the settlement of Guliai-Polye with the aviation. The Russians use lots of aircrafts, lots of bombs, and it seems, and based on all these videos, based on all these strikes that we receive every single day, I came to the conclusion that the Russians are tasked not just to capture the city of Guliai-Polye, the Russians are tasked to capture the city as fast as possible. So it seems that the Russians have just 1 or 2 weeks to finish the battle. And we understand why, because the Ukrainians are trying to bring in this direction as many as possible free battalions and brigades with the purpose to stabilize the situation, and after the fall of the city of Guliai-Polye, not to allow the Russians to cross the Zaporizhzhia wall. And so that is why the Russians are trying to, let's say, act very fast. They want to finish the battle before the Ukrainians finish their strategic regrouping. And when they finish the strategic regrouping, the Russians want to see themselves on the Ukrainian side of the river. So this is a very important situation. So everything will be resolved here. And this is another reason why the United States of America and the Western countries are trying to slow down these offensives, all these, let's say, military actions with the diplomacy, because they understand that Ukrainians probably need another 1 or 2 or 3 months to prepare additional defense layers between the city of Guliai-Polye and Zaporizhzhia. Because summarizing everything, if Russians can capture and can break through this line, R85 road, this means that they will be able to get the city of Zaporizhzhia within the next 5 months, which means that there are very high chances that within the next 5 months, by the beginning or by the end of May of 2026, the city of Zaporizhzhia would be captured by the armed force of the Russian Federation. And obviously 5 months is a very, very short period of time, and this might happen very, very soon and very, very fast. For example, the territory between the village of Velika Novoselka and the road R85, the Russians have crossed for 5 to 6 months. So we have a very good example, and the distance between this area and the city of Zaporizhzhia is almost the same. So we can say that the Russians will require the same amount of days, months to finish and to do something similar. But another important thing, that this direction and this area has less fortifications and less strongholds that Ukrainians used to have in the area between R85 road and the city of Guliai-Polye and the territory around the settlement of Velika Novoselka. Just take a look at this dense network of the fortifications, at this number of strongholds between the city of Donetsk and the city of Guliai-Polye. And now let's take a look at the area to the west of the city of Guliai-Polye. Empty fields, just 2 lines and nothing special, nothing that can stop Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Pokrovsk. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very important videos and changes on the ground. So this is the situation by the end of the 25th of November of 2025. We received reports that the Russians improved their positions in the most northwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians improved their positions around Rivne. The Russians improved their positions along the railways to the east of the city of Pokrovsk. But But this morning, several pro-Russian sources adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor. So these are the changes. As you can see, we have added lots of yellow clouds, lots of yellow areas, which means that Ukrainians managed to counterattack not just during the previous 24 hours, but most likely these counterattacks started maybe for 3 or 4 days ago. And during this period of time, during the previous 4 or 5 days, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to improve the corridor between the city of Mirnograd and the mainland. So now let's discuss everything. So let's first talk about the western part and the northwestern part. This is the situation by the end of the 25th of November, and this is by the end of the 26th. Several very reliable pro-Russian sources adjusted this territory under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So we adjusted this map back in Ukrainian favor because all these changes, every single area of this, let's say, gray zone, first was added by the same pro-Russian sources and neutral mappers. And since the moment when they added these territories under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, we haven't received even a single proof of Russian control over these territories. So that is why we've been keeping these territories as a gray zone. But due to the fact that the same resources that added, first of all, Russian control now are removing this Russian control back, so we adjusted the map back as well. So this is the current situation, which means that Ukrainians still have control over the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk, and the Ukrainians control everything to the north of the river by the name of Gryshenka. Now let's move further or deeper towards the TO515 road, this one. Just yesterday we discussed that the Russians managed to encircle the Ukrainians completely along the TO515 road, and now we have the adjustments that show us that the Ukrainians still have a corridor for evacuation. We're not saying that this is a safe corridor and that Ukrainians can use this corridor in full strength, that they can move from the east to the west. Obviously they will suffer losses, but at the same time today the pro-Ukrainian sources published this video, and this is obviously not the August of 2025, and this is not even the September and not even the October. We see that this is most likely the November. Very difficult to say whether this is the beginning of November or the late November. Very difficult to say, but it seems that this is the late November. And here we can see how Ukrainians answered the northern citadel of the city of Pokrovsk, the northeastern part, and how Ukrainians managed to ambush Russian soldiers in this area. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have added additional blocks of the northern citadel of the city under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So we see that this territory is not under strong control of Russian forces. There are lots of gaps, lots of, let's say, gray zones and so on, and Ukrainians use the situation for, let's say, evacuation purposes. At the same time, the Russians moved their focus on the city of Mirnograd. The clashes in this area continue, and Russians improved their positions from the south, from the west, from the north, and from the east. So this is the situation by the end of the 25th of November, and this is the situation by the end of the 26th of November. All these changes were made based on the reports of different mappers and pro-Russian experts. Furthermore, we adjusted the most eastern part of the city of Mirnograd based on this video, where we can see how Ukrainians captured several Russian soldiers almost in the most central part of the city. So these Russian soldiers were captured exactly at this point. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that everything to the east was also captured by the Russians by the time the soldiers were captured in the central part. And the video with the Russian captured soldiers in the central part of the city of Mirnograd tell us also a lot. First of all, it tells us that Ukrainians are losing their strong control over the city of Mirnograd itself, and it seems that the defense of the city will collapse also in coming days. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Konstantinovka. The Ukrainians are preparing themselves before the beginning of the battle for the city itself as well. The Ukrainians are bringing additional forces. The Russians at the same time are regrouping in the southeastern part of the city. The Russians collecting forces and regrouping after the battle for Ivanopolia. Several pro-Russian sources stated that there are still positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territories of the villages of Nilipovka, Plishevka and Ivanopolia. Stavropol. So Russians are planning and trying to secure this area before moving further in the direction of the settlement of Berestok. And the Russians furthermore began clearing the city with the village of Berestok with FPV drones. It seems that the Russians are planning to use the village of Berestok as the foothold and base before moving further along N20 road towards the southwestern and the western part of the city of Pokrovsk itself, Konstantinovka itself. The city of Siversk. As for the previous 24 hours, the most important updates came from pro-Ukrainian sources. The Russian armed forces have become more active and are making progress in the Siversk area. For a long time, changes have occurred on this section of the front line. The Russian armed forces have increasingly begun to be recorded in the city, in particular in the southern part of the settlement, as well on the eastern outskirts. The sources are saying that by the evening of the 26th of November of 2025, the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine in the eastern part of the city of Siversk has collapsed completely. So Ukrainians this upcoming night most likely will withdraw their positions towards the central and the western part of the city of Siversk. They will try to cross the railways and they will try to establish defense and to save control over these territories along the railways. So we see that the Ukrainians are trying to stay as close as possible to the main evacuation roads, because during the previous 24 hours we also started receiving lots of videos from the settlement of Zakitne. So the sources are saying that the Russians are trying to improve their positions around this village with the purpose to capture the settlement and to enter the Siversk operational space and to have possibilities to attack Ukrainians from behind. So that is why the Ukrainians are trying to stay on the safe side, and if something bad happens, they want to be as close as possible to the main evacuation roads, and they don't want to be encircled by Russians, because the Russians obviously have something to tell those Ukrainians who've been protecting and defending the city of Siversk since 2022. We know that this direction, the territory between the city of Siversk, Belogorovka, Verkhnyi Kamenka, probably was the most difficult direction for the Russian forces, and the Russians paid significant price for this area. As for the Kupiansk and the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, during the previous 24 hours nothing special happened. The Russians continue their clearing operation, the Russians continue controlling the main supply lines and the main evacuation roads, and if anything enters this territory, the Russians try to destroy it immediately. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.